Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is the fifth session of the Create HDR series for this year. My name's Sue Orlovich, and it's a real pleasure to be hosting the session today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which I work and learn today. I'm on the land of the Darawal people and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And I particularly recognise and celebrate the artistic practices of storytelling, of dance, music, and visual art that Indigenous peoples have engaged in for millennia. And I acknowledge how these practices sustain communities, validate experiences, nurture relationships, and serve as essential forms of cultural continuity for First Nations. And finally, I extend deep respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are with us today or watching the recording. So as many of you know, our sessions begin with a presentation from a colleague in the field of arts research, and we follow this by a chance to ask questions and share our wonderings. And so it's an absolute pleasure to introduce Kristy today. Kristy Smith is a doctoral candidate in the Faculty of Education at York University in Toronto, Canada. And her research explores how high school drama teachers build relationships with and care for students, particularly when navigating scene work that incorporates physical intimacy, emotional vulnerability, explorations of identity, as well as mature or controversial topics. And her other research interests include literacies, 2S LGBTQ+ youth and education, fandom studies, and all things theatre and performance. So in today's session, Kristy's going to report on her dissertation research, in which she interviewed high school drama teachers from across Canada working in different kinds of schools, in mainstream public, arts-focused, independent, private, French language and religious schools. And she'll share findings pertaining to how drama teachers cultivate communities of care in their classes and rehearsal spaces, how they make decisions about school plays, how they support students while navigating risky scene work, and how they both anticipate and respond to tensions while exploring mature or challenging topics with youth. And Kristy also spent 7 weeks with a high school drama class in Saskatchewan as a participant observer throughout the duration of a devised theatre unit. And she's going to share some findings about the kinds of stories students choose to tell and how their classroom teacher supports them throughout the collaborative creative process. I can't wait to hear your presentation, Kristy, so I'll throw over to you now. And it's wonderful that you've been able to share your learnings and your research journey with us today.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. If you're joining us in real time or watching the recording, thank you so much for being here. My name is Kristy Smith, and my presentation today is titled The Landscape of Canadian Drama Teachers' Pedagogies, Navigating Care, Discomfort, and Creative Risk in the High School Drama Class. So I'm starting off with a bit of an agenda just to kind of orient us to the kinds of work and things that I'll be sharing today. So I'll begin with a land acknowledgement of my own that I conceptualize as a bit of a triad. I'll introduce you to the research I've been doing, some pedagogical questions that I faced when I was a classroom teacher that led me to this research, and ultimately the questions that guide this exploration as well. I'll briefly speak about the theory that informs how I make meaning of the data, as well as the research design. And the bulk of my presentation will be on sharing findings through a few different kind of thematic categories that I've shared here. So I think about relationality, care, teachers' caring practices for taking on intimate scene work more specifically. Discomfort, risk, and pedagogical failure or perceived pedagogical failure. And I'll also speak a little bit about my time with the grade 11 drama class for the in-school research component of my dissertation. And then I'll leave you with some concluding thoughts and look forward to some questions and discussion afterwards. So in beginning my process of thinking about the land of which on which I work and live, I approach this kind of as a triad. So I live both in Toronto, Ontario, and in Regina, Saskatchewan as well. So I'm living and working in two different spaces. So I've provided the land acknowledgement that my university, York University, offers. Um, and I won't read through all of it, but just to give you an idea of who the traditional custodians of this land are in the area known as Toronto or Tikaronto. So we have the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and we are also operating under the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I've also provided the land acknowledgement from the University of Regina, where I do some work there, and then in Saskatchewan, I did some of my research as well. Um, so Saskatchewan is home to many Indigenous nations, the Cree, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the Métis. In Regina, where I live part of the time, the city was once known as the place where bones are piled up, and that is coming from the Cree language, which gives Regina the nickname of Pile of Bones. And Regina, interestingly, on the other side, has another nickname as the Queen City, which kind of is a nod towards our colonial history, kind of coming from the British Empire and colonization. And as the final part of this triad, I like to reflect on my own history, where I come from, where my family comes from. Pictured here, I have an image from the website called nativeland.ca. And what it is it's a map of Canada where you can hover over different cities, provinces, territories, and it will show you who the traditional owners of the land are, both historically and for Indigenous nations that reside there and take care of the land today. So one side of my family comes from Newfoundland, particularly Bishop's Cove. And so I wanted to give a bit of history about that land. So this was information I found from the local historical board website, where in the 16th century, there was allegedly peaceful coexistence between the Beothuk people, the indigenous people who lived there, and European settlers. In the 17th century, European colonizers established fisheries and denied the Beothuk people access to the sea, which served as their main source of food, as well as other natural resources that they used in other parts of their lives. And as a result of this, the last known Beothuk person died in 1829. So in tracing my family's history on my father's side, I have some family in Newfoundland who created a family genealogy Facebook group, and they were able to trace as far back as my great-great-grandparents. With some certainty, there are other ancestors that we think may have been part of our family, but we are not entirely sure. But what I do know is that several members of my family had worked in the fishing industry in Newfoundland. And so it feels there's a discomfort and a vulnerability that I feel in sharing this element of my history. But as we're working towards truth and reconciliation in Canada, similarly to Australia as another Commonwealth country with a history of colonization, that discomfort and that vulnerability is important as a part of reconciliation. And so I just wanted to briefly share kind of my acknowledgements of the land on which I live and work. So to begin, going all the way back in terms of how I became involved in drama education, my kindergarten teacher had recommended I pursue drama lessons on the weekends because I had infinite amounts of energy. And she noticed that I had gravitated towards the puppet theater in the classroom during free play. So she thought that this would be a great thing for me. And it was. It really did kind of dictate the trajectory that my life took. I know in a lot of drama education scholarship, we talk about how drama is helpful almost as an intervention of sorts to different concerns or different kind of learning skills. So we know drama education is helpful for literacy, language learning, and it's also helpful for neurodivergent students, students who have autism or ADHD. I was a very energetic 4-year-old, and I learned in my adult life that was because I have ADHD. So just to kind of situate myself in the drama education research, I offer that background. I pursued my undergrad in theater and film studies, as well as cultural studies and critical theory, and then pursued a Bachelor of Education to teach high school and middle school drama and English, which I did for a few years at an independent school in Toronto before beginning my doctorate. So during this time, I was responsible for directing the high school play every year, as well as devising original work with my drama students. And so during that time, I taught drama classes spanning from grades 3 to grade 12, as it was a K to 12 school. So while directing the high school plays, I started asking myself some questions as to how to navigate staged intimacy with students in a way that was safe, that promoted consent um, with my students. And this was the first time I was directing moments of intimacy on stage. So when I talk about intimacy, I'm thinking about moments where two characters share a kiss, hold hands, hug, engage in any kind of physical contact, but also the emotional intimacy that comes from having two student actors play romantic opposites. So, some of the questions that I grappled with during my time teaching was how could I show care for students with attention to respecting their boundaries as well as interpersonal relationships among students? I was at a very small school, so I felt like I knew my students very well. But I also knew that the relationships, friendships, difficult tensions that students had between each other might be outside my realm of knowledge and understanding. I wondered how I might mitigate the power imbalance between myself as the teacher director and my students. And I also question what belongs on stage in a high school play and where the line is between creative and intellectual work that's generative in its risk and material that's too risky or perhaps not appropriate for school plays. So with those questions in mind, these are the research questions that has guided my exploration so far. So I wondered what pedagogical practices drama teachers use to engage students in intimate scene work. I know the kind of discomforts and uncertainties I felt myself, so I was curious how other drama teachers approach this. I wondered what discomforts drama teachers face while doing this kind of work and how they navigate those discomforts. I wonder how drama teachers show care for their students while taking on intimate scene work. And what do teachers make of the relational aspects of teaching elements of intimacy in their practice? And what do they make of relationality within drama teaching in general? So I've outlined my theoretical commitments here, a few scholars who have really inspired how I'm thinking about making meaning of this research. So I turn towards Sharon Todd's concept of the educational encounter, with attention to the relational, sensuous, and embodied nature of teaching and learning in the arts. So Todd asserts that the educational encounter is a moment when students are learning in relation to each other, the world, works of art, and that these educational encounters have implications for students' processes of becoming and identity formation. I also consider Nell Nodding's concept of care in that the teacher, being in the position of the one caring, offers a gesture of care to students in the position of the cared for, and the idea that the one being cared for must receive the gesture as caring in order for an act of care to authentically take place. I also look at Jen Gilbert's theorizing of school as a place that is imbued with elements of relationality, intimacy, sexuality, and eroticism. For high school students, school is a site where they rehearse elements of romantic and sexual identity formation, gender expression, crushes, first relationships, and emotional entanglements with others. There are many other examples, but I like to keep the idea of school as a site where these explorations take place in mind. So just a quick little note on my research design. I've conducted semi-structured interviews with high school drama teachers across Canada, 13 so far, and I'm hoping to interview two more. And I spent 7 weeks with a grade 11 high school drama class at an independent school in Saskatchewan throughout the duration of a unit on devised theater, and that was the final unit they were exploring in the course. And in terms of how I'm making meaning of my data, I've used elements of situational analysis, which entails mapping elements of a research situation through different categories. So geographical locations, social cultural contexts, key events that happen in the time of research, to capture significant things that may have otherwise been missed. And I also use elements of narrative analysis, which looks at how humans account for their actions and events around them and how those shape their everyday experiences. So I've offered a little bit of context on my participants so far through pseudonyms, of course. Um, So I've interviewed teachers in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and Manitoba. And these teachers teach in a variety of different schools and in different contexts. So there's public schools, private schools, Catholic schools, arts-focused schools, French schools, a really nice variety represented. One teacher is teaching in a public school that has a program specifically designed to serve Indigenous students as well. And so that's just a little bit of context of the teachers I worked with. So I'm going to jump into my research findings at this stage. So in thinking about relationality, I wanted to think about the relationships that drama teachers had themselves that brought them into a career in teaching drama at the high school level. So several teachers, Marcus, Serena, and Kendra, reported pursuing careers in drama teaching because of the positive relationships that they had with their own drama teachers in high school. Specifically, Kendra teaches at her own former high school, and she ended up actually taking over the drama classes from the person who was her own drama teacher in high school. She had a really good experience, and I learned through our interview that she models her own pedagogy after what she learned from her former teachers. Serena has stayed in touch with some of her high school drama teachers, some of whom became her colleagues when she became a teacher herself. And in our interview together, Marcus spent a good amount of time offering kind of thorough descriptions of three drama teachers he had in high school and spoke about the qualities he really appreciated in them that he tries to bring to his own pedagogy and his own practice. And I thought that this was an interesting finding in how he develops his own identity as a teacher, in part based on the teachers he had positive relationships with when he was a student. Um, so every teacher I interviewed spoke about the importance of building relationships with drama students in some way. Typically before I asked them, how do you go about building relationships with students? Most of them offered that they spend the first 4 to 6 weeks of class with a new cohort playing drama games, icebreakers, and doing community and team building exercises as a way of creating a connected classroom community. I offer a specific example from Lily, who, in addition to being a drama teacher, is also a dancer. And she begins new classes with mindfulness and movement activities to help students connect first to their own bodies and then to each other through practices like rehearsing eye contact, sharing space together, as well as consent-based practices in relation to physical touch. I offer here some excerpts from the interview. So Lily, in describing her mindfulness and movement practices, said, so they, students, learn how to physically create boundaries or physically connect to other people, but then also accept that connection from another person. Because there's two things, there's the giving and the receiving, and some kids aren't good at receiving either. In my interview with Andrea, she spoke about bringing students together every day through asking an attendance question and also really engaging in that kind of embodied work. So when we were discussing how she kind of helps students work through creating original stories based on their lived experiences, she really leaned into that attunement with the body to help guide students through that kind of work. So she said, to me, you're handling potentially dangerous substances. And this is where all the body awareness work comes in and a daily check-in. And just that sort of awareness of like, where are you feeling things in your body? What is your body telling you? Where do you feel anger in your body? Where do you feel sadness, hopelessness? Where do you feel fear, frustration, restlessness? Just being aware of where things live in your body so that when you're talking about this story, it might feel super resonant for you, but what is your system telling you? Should you be the one putting this on stage, or can you be our source of information? Most teachers in my study also very much valued student voice and tried to prioritize that in their pedagogy by creating opportunities for students to connect with each other and collaboratively create scenes together. And most students shared that when given the chance to write or devise their own scenes, students gravitated towards telling stories that represent something meaningful to them in their own lives. Identity was a theme that came up in pretty much every interview. And just a few examples of the stories that students would tell include stories about gender identity, Life in Canada as a New Immigrant in High School, and mental health. And the mental health piece came from an interview with Marcus, in which he was talking about how students were really struggling with their mental health during COVID and returning to school, and that they felt their concerns weren't being taken seriously or they didn't have enough support from the adults in their lives. And so they devised an original piece about mental health, which he video recorded with students' permission. And he actually played it at a parent-teacher association meeting to kind of show the parents, the teachers, the administration, here's what the kids are going through, here are the needs that they're articulating, what can we do to support them? And I thought that that was really powerful. Some teachers reported that senior students often wanted to create pieces to show to students in younger grades, in the hopes of teaching them something, offering them some guidance or mentorship about surviving high school, things like that. And then another specific example coming from my interview with Andrea. She begins each class by asking an attendance question and starts with something very low risk. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream, for example, and builds towards questions that are more personal and therefore invite a deeper level of vulnerability from students in the hopes of really bringing them together as a community and as a support system for each other. In looking at the ways that teachers show care for students, there were many different examples that were definitely too many to share in my presentation today, so I offer a few here. It's definitely not exhaustive, but I wanted to illustrate how drama teachers often show care for students in unique ways, or ways we may not think of or think are a little bit unorthodox. So my interview with Seth, he spoke about how he consistently reflects on his identity and his own intersectionality, and graciously accepts critical feedback from students. And later on, when I'm talking about discomfort and risk, I'll share some more specific examples that Seth shared with me. So Kate discussed allowing a student to perform their character in drag at his own request in the 1990s, but protected the student's privacy by listing their first initial and last name in the program. At this time, she didn't feel comfortable writing the student's full name in the program, and so that was a step she took to, facilitate him creating the kind of performance that he wanted, but while also protecting him in case there was any backlash or difficult feelings from the audience. Lily teaches in a Catholic school and talked about facing a lot of backlash from administration and some of her other colleagues after allowing her students to perform an original story about a trans student's experience attending a Catholic school during a religious assembly. And Melanie talked about using the perceived safety of having students embody fictional characters as a way to tell their stories. She spoke about how trying to encourage students to feel safe enough to tell their own stories could be a challenge, but when they had the venue of a fictional character, that seemed to be a way that students could work through questions and stories that they wanted to tell. She also has students write reflective journals, and she uses the seven grandfather teachings from Anishinaabe culture to teach students communication skills about how to advocate for their needs, establish boundaries, and care for each other. So she teaches in a specialty program designed for Indigenous students. She is a non-Indigenous teacher herself, but brings these teachings into her pedagogy as a way to help students learn those skills and build those connections. The teacher I did my in-school research with, Ken, creates a safe space in the school's theater for what he described as quote unquote lower achieving students, queer students as well, and students who feel they have nowhere else to go during lunch or after school. So the stage in the school was a bit of a kind of landing place or a kind of safe home base for students at the school. Many teachers also drew a distinction between what they allow students to explore in class and what they will put on stage for a public audience. So the drama class is operating as a private, safer space. And then when a public performance is involved, there were certain things that teachers wouldn't let kids put on stage for their parents, families, school administration, etc. So when I asked how teachers navigate stage intimacy with student actors, four of them actually responded by telling me stories from their youth of how stage intimacy was handled problematically at school and in community theater. I thought it was really interesting that in response to me asking how they as teachers work through intimacy work with students, they reflected first on their own experiences as students. So a few examples, some teachers actually had their first kisses on stage in front of a live audience. Others had teachers pressure them into forms of intimacy they didn't want to do. For example, if there was a kiss in the script, it's in the script, it has to happen. That was kind of the mentality of some of their teachers. And one teacher talked about how they were cast as a romantic opposite of a 19-year-old man when they were both 12 and then 13 years old. So feeling that their own teachers and directors had failed them in some way, teachers in my study reflected on these memories as instructive of what they would not do in their own practice and how they wanted to do better for their own students. Here I've compiled kind of two slides of teachers' caring practices for intimate scene work specifically. So teachers spoke about embedding consent-based practices into all areas of their rehearsals and their pedagogy more generally in class as well. They would provide information prior to auditions about any intimate or high-risk moments characters face in the play so that students can make informed decisions about what characters they would like to audition for. They could also write in kind of their audition form any characters they did not want to play as well. They gave students options for how they like to portray intimacy and change those moments in the script in accordance with students' comfort and preferences. So an example, they might replace a kiss between two characters with a hug instead. Teachers allowed students to choose their own costumes, and they also adjusted intimate moments based on when their families attended school plays. So one teacher shared that she had two students who were comfortable to do a stage kiss for the public performance, but as they both came from families with pretty strict religious observances, they decided not to have the stage kiss during the performance that their parents attended. Teachers also proactively chose scripts that don't contain sexual violence, any sexual content in general, or they would choose scripts with lower risk moments of intimacy. They were mindful to honor students' consent while also making executive decisions if they felt that perhaps a student was offering consent, not because they felt comfortable, but because they wanted to make their teacher and other students happy. They leaned in towards devising original student-led stories and productions instead of scripted plays to elevate students' autonomy over what they were performing. And they also demonstrated care for the audience through offering content warnings to audience members in the programs they would create for the play if there was anything that could be traumatic or triggering. And some teachers replaced stage kisses with other symbolic gestures. So Samuel offered the example of having students give each other a little heart made out of craft felt instead of actually having a stage kiss during the play. In thinking about, I call this section discomfort, risk, and pedagogical quote unquote failure, because I wanted to explore some of the discomforts that teachers face in doing this work as well. So Marcus and Samuel both shared that they're particularly careful about how they navigate staged intimacy, in part because they're male teachers and wanted to be aware of the gendered kind of power dynamics there. Ken School puts on a musical every year, and these shows often include a kiss between characters as kind of the main climactic moment of the story. While admittedly uncomfortable with directing students through intimacy himself, he also critically questioned what the kiss means for students' discomfort too. So I have a little excerpt here from our interview together. He said, I never felt the kisses in musicals were well done because there's pressure. And it's baked into the fabric of the thing because it's a production and you're in this role and you got the lead. And oh my gosh, there's 1,000 adults watching you, watching teenagers kiss on stage. Like, what are we doing here? That feels different than like, okay, I wrote the scene, me and my scene partner want to do this. I know as well in Saskatchewan, there's a particularly interesting educational context happening now where a lot of drama classes are being replaced with a musical production course. So instead of the high school musical being an extracurricular, it's being turned into a course. And what we're seeing happen is that drama classes are disappearing because of that. They're either being replaced entirely, or if students have both options and want to be in the musical, drama classes are at risk of being cut from course options in schools. So that's kind of a recent current phenomena that we're seeing in Saskatchewan. So I also wanted to look at how teachers make decisions about choosing the school play, and there were a number of different factors that teachers consider when making these choices. So Andrea shared that she only hosts performances during school hours because she teaches in a neighborhood that can become unsafe after dark. There are gangs present in the area, and so a lot of parents feel that the risk of violence is too high, and they want their children to be home before it gets dark outside. Kate, Samuel, and Jamie all felt pressure to choose popular plays and musicals to attract large audiences, in part to cover the costs of putting on the play. Each of them teach in smaller towns that don't have overwhelmingly robust public arts culture. And so the theater offerings in their towns are quite small. And so they felt they needed to gravitate towards kind of the big Broadway shows in order to attract an audience. Marcus and Samuel spoke about how they both have to disappoint students every year because they want to put on rent. Marcus said because he teaches in a Catholic school and Rent features themes of gender identity, 2S LGBTQ plus identity, performing that show in a Catholic school and a Catholic school board would be a challenge. And Samuel just firmly said, this is too mature for teenagers. I'm not comfortable staging it with them. Um, and then Kendra spoke to me about the challenges of finding plays written in French, as she teaches in an Acadian small town, a fishing village, and a French language school. And so, in order to find a play that's in French and has enough roles for her students to play, she'll collect ideas from her students about the kinds of stories that they want to tell, and she will write the script herself, which is a practice that she learned from her own high school drama teacher. Some teachers as well spoke to me about moments where they felt they had failed their students or messed up or had an uncomfortable moment. And I wanted to share this example that Serena shared with me here. So she spoke about how her school had been becoming more diverse over the last decade or so, and described a moment that taught her a lot about the assumptions that we might hold. Um, about pedagogy, regardless of who was in our classroom. So she described an instance here that really shifted how she navigates physical touch. So she was describing putting on a play about the zombie apocalypse with students, and was directing a male student to grab a chunk of a female student's hair and sniff it in character as a zombie. Um, so, over and over, she's instructing him just grab the hair and sniff it. And he seems hesitant. He's not getting close enough. And eventually he says, Miss, I'm not allowed to touch female students. And so this was a moment where she realized she was failing to account for her students' religious observances. And from this moment, she shifted towards employing consent-based practices in her teaching, and also said she distributes student surveys confidentially at the beginning of the year so they can share information about their beliefs, their boundaries, what they're not willing to do, and anything they think is important for their teacher to know. Seth described an experience where he was working with students on a devised show that featured a scene where a character was hitting on their much younger cousin at a funeral. And there was a bit of a discrepancy between how Seth understood the scene and how his students understood the scene. So here he said, I was trying to make it playful and funny and stuff like that. So we got through the whole rehearsal, and the kids were like, I don't think you read this properly. And I'm like, what do you mean? And there they said, he's sexually harassing her. She tells him to stop and he doesn't stop. And that's not okay. And to pretend that he's just being friendly in the first scene gaslights all the women, all the assigned female at birth kids who have ever been hit on by a relative, and that this is something that happens to us. And I'm like, wow, damn it. So this moment was really quite a pedagogical moment for Seth, but also led to a teachable moment for students. So Seth responded by sharing kind of how he interpreted the moment and going through the script and showing students why he interpreted it that way. And they were able to work together to ensure that by the time they were performing in front of an audience, the audience would receive the message that students were trying to convey in this scene. And kind of hearing this story for me showed that the relationships drama teachers and students build are crucial for being able to listen to each other and work through those moments of discomfort together. So here I'll speak briefly about my time in a grade 11 drama class, and I'll speak a little bit about the school because it's a bit of an interesting space. So the school originally began as a religious school that was founded by Christian missionaries. As is the case for a few different schools in Saskatchewan, it's technically an independent Christian school, but they do still receive public funding from the provincial government because there is quite a large kind of Christian presence in Saskatchewan historically, and that endures today. So it's a Christian school, but over the years, they've become much more secular in order to serve the student body that they have. So it is both a Christian school, but not overwhelmingly so. It is a private or independent school, but the school still receives some public funding, and most students pay either no tuition or reduced tuition, about 80% of students. It's also a day school, but they have a small number of students who live in the dormitories there as sort of a boarding school. So in our interview, Ken described that the school has had an ongoing identity crisis, but I thought it was an interesting space because the school is a little bit of everything all at once somehow. So I joined this class as they were beginning a unit on devised theater. And so we started by creating a massive brainstorm list of any and all topics that students found interesting. We use the list as a starting point and use many different devising processes, some of which include improv, endowing fictional settings through kind of a verbal stream of consciousness process, as well as using physical set pieces, props, music, improvising monologues, and curating selections of visual images and sounds to represent the mood or the tone that students wanted the scene to have. So the final show that students performed was a vignette style performance in which they told stories based on their identities, their lived experiences, and their excitements, anxieties, and questions about the future. So the show began with students scattered throughout the performance space, which was kind of a theater gymnasium hybrid, where there was a stage with curtains, a lighting grid, and sound. And then the audience space was a gymnasium where we would bring in chairs for the audience to use. Each student offered a brief monologue in character as one of the characters that audiences would meet in the scenes to come. And each character kind of struggled with a question or problem. And this intro scene led into the rest of the show. So I've offered some examples of the kinds of scenes that followed and the things that students explored. So one scene showed a Christian man facing a faith crisis after losing his wife and daughter in a car accident. Another scene featured a high school student struggling with feeling like she was being forced into the role of a parent after her parents had a baby when she was already in high school. Actually, two different scenes looked at a teenager and their parents struggling to understand each other due to generational differences, really wanting to come together, but feeling those communication barriers. There was a scene that was a bit of a game show style. The kids called it Wheel of Personalities scene. That showed the different identities that students wear when they're taking on the role of a friend, a student, their parent's child, and as kind of the private, laziest version of themselves, is how they described it. I think we called that character the slob. Um, and also a reconciliation of what parts of ourselves we lose when we grow up and take on adult responsibilities. So here I just want to share a reflection on my first observation day when everyone was present in the drama class. During my very first day, there were only two students present, so this was actually my second day of observation, but the first day where I got to meet everyone. On my first observation day, where everyone was present in the drama class, a girl walked into the room and offered her teacher and myself a Twizzler candy. Even though she'd never seen me before, she didn't question who I was or why I was there. In the moment, it reminded me why I love how unapologetically genuine high school students can be. But upon reflection, this moment reminded me why the drama class is a beloved space at school. It is a place where we all belong. A student's simple gesture of offering me candy was an invitation. She didn't know who I was, but she could trust that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I would later learn that this student, and I've given her the pseudonym Belinda, often shares candy or treats she bakes herself with teachers and peers. For her, these offerings are a love language she uses to show the people in her life at school that she cares about them. And to conclude, I end this presentation with a story from when my time conducting research with high school drama students began, in part to illustrate that the impacts of drama education and the relationships that we build in these spaces don't end when we send report cards home or take our final bow in a school play. The echoes of high school drama education are felt throughout one's lifetime, and drama teachers can become key players in how students make career decisions, how they establish friendships and relationships, and how they move through the world in their bodies as beings in relation to others in the world. It is a heavy responsibility, but a responsibility that can be honored in the relationships we build with students, in the moments that we care for them, and the discomforts that we navigate together along the way. So I want to thank you so much for having me today. And I also want to offer a special thanks to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada for funding this research through a doctoral fellowship. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'm really excited to hear any questions you might have and engage in a discussion together. Thank you.
Oh, Kristy, thank you so much. I so enjoyed listening to your presentation, and what a beautiful way to end with your observation notes around Belinda, who made that offering to you. It was a beautiful way to capture what how it played out from a student's perspective. You know, that what you're talking about in relation to the environment of care, which was so diverse. Your examples were so diverse across your settings. And I've got lots of questions, but I've got one, I guess, that that comes to mind, which is around, were there any big surprises in your gathering of data? You obviously had um, very diverse settings that you had observed, and the teachers who were your participants obviously serve communities that are incredibly diverse. Were there big surprises along the way, or um, were there ideas that you had that were confirmed or rejected? I'm curious about your thinking during the.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of surprises. I
Yeah.
think some of the big ones that stood out to me. I was really surprised when I asked teachers about how they navigate intimate scene work with students. I was surprised that four of my teachers began with reflecting on negative experiences they had as students themselves.
Mm,
I think partially because they wouldn't have expected that as a response to the question in general, but I also really appreciated the vulnerability that teachers, were willing to offer me in telling those stories.
mm,
And how I represent those stories are things that I've left out as well. While all of our participants sign our consent forms, I think that, that discernment and, what parts of stories we decide to share from our participants is always an ethical question to engage with.
yeah.
Um, I think that was very surprising, and also surprising at how recent some of those examples were for teachers who are still quite young, still earlier in their teaching career.
Mm,
I think too, and this is another kind of piece in the data I didn't feel I had time to include in this presentation, but I was also kind of pleasantly struck by how much care teachers showed for the profession. In talking about, there's so much I didn't learn in teachers college that I really had to learn along the way. And so teachers offered really wonderful suggestions for how we can prepare, future drama teachers who are in their Bachelor of Education programs. To enjoy that success. And so they spoke a lot about what they learned in their practice, but also spoke about things that they wish they had so that they could better serve their students and their communities.
mm,
A lot of them are very much advocates for the arts and their professions. I would say that wasn't quite as surprising to me because I feel like, in the arts, we're always kind of having to defend what we have and what we do, and, really trying to show people outside of drama, outside of the arts in general, what it has to offer. And I was also surprised by how um, nuanced teachers were in talking about, what brought them to drama and also what they think drama education is and what it should offer.
mm,
Um, and, the existing scholarship shows drama education is, wonderful for so many different things. But to kind of hear from my teachers, I'm not trying to create actors. I'm trying to create good people who have the skills to, you know, leave my classroom and whatever they decide to do, I want, what I teach them in drama class to be helpful.
Mm.
That was kind of a long answer, but yeah, lots of
And
surprises.
isn't that the wonderful thing about research is that it does, there's so many surprises emerge along the way. Yeah, fantastic. I'm still struck by Belinda though, and the way that she welcomed you into that safe and brave space by making that offering. Really powerful example. So thankful that you shared that.
Well, I was really interested in the that
Mm.
relational um, theme that came out with all of your participants. And I'm reminded of Parker Palmer's, We Teach Who We Are,
Mm.
and
Mm.
work that he's done on how who we are and our own experiences, etc., affect so much the kinds of teachers that we become. But I was also interested in, because of what's happening in New South Wales with the group performance in the HS High School Certificate drama syllabus. Um, and your comment just then about in the arts, we always seem to be fighting for our place and our space,
Mm.
despite the fact that we just know it's so important, not in terms of necessarily becoming an artist in the creative industries, although that happens as well, but in terms of who we are and how we live our lives.
Mm.
And currently, the consultation for the new drama final 2 years syllabus is suggesting that the devised group performance that is part of the current syllabus um, does not stay as an externally presented performance,
Mm.
but
Right.
that it is an internal school performance that the students then write about, and the writing about it is assessed. So there's a lot of talk about that now, and I was interested in the way that some of your teachers were talking about how the group devised the performance, the presentations that they devise can
Mhm.
be, just so meaningful and relevant for them, and also allow them to express the things that they feel are important and feel comfortable, expressing. So,
Mm.
Yeah, it was interesting too with stories that were very close to students' own experiences. For example, the student who felt they were becoming kind of parentified in their family as they had a new baby sibling. And throughout that devising process in the scene, they kept calling the student by the student's name. And after a while, another student who was very, in all the productions, does theater in the community, very involved, offered this suggestion of, why don't we give this character a name? Because I feel like we're confusing your story and the story you want to tell. And I thought that was so insightful and, really kind of shows that the line between real life and fiction, when students are using devised theater to explore things that resonate with them in their own lives, can become really blurry sometimes.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
yeah.
And that beautiful example that you shared around the drama, the mental health drama around COVID, and the lovely opportunity that the teacher then had to share that with parents and caregivers and the wider community to give students voice. Yeah, fantastic. Uh,
Yeah, so
I
powerful.
do have a little question, if that's okay, if there's time. I apologize, I haven't been able to have my camera on. Um, I'm just curious, do you have any kind of aspiration for where this work will go, or how this work may influence something, or where do you kind of see, like, or where do you want this work to live?
That's a great question. I feel like there's a million possibilities in my head,
Yeah.
but I'll stick to a few. I think I try, even though in my dissertation I do ask some critical questions, of course, I try to think of my dissertation almost as a letter of appreciation to drama education. I find, I'm sure this is the case in many different places, but kind of seeing how drama education is really devalued
Mm,
in Canada, I really want to illustrate and, build upon the work of scholars that came before me, how much drama teachers actually do and how meaningful that work is for their students, not just in the classroom for September till January, which is our school semester, at least in Ontario usually, but how that work kind of lives in days to come. And then another piece is I want to kind of explore those caring practices that teachers use with intimate scene work specifically.
mm,
Kind of before devising or designing this research project, I was looking at another possibility of hoping to bring like an intimacy coordinator into a high school drama class to see what new learning about consent could emerge.
mm,
And then COVID happened, so that was not a possible research project. But in these interviews, I'm realizing this was the kind of work that I needed to do first. And so I also really want to lean into kind of the caring practices that teachers are using with intimate work and bring that both into scholarship and then hopefully into professional communities as a helpful resource for teachers who, like myself a few years ago, felt really unsure how to do that in a way
mm,
that was, safer for students while maintaining kind of those professional boundaries as well.
mm. Well, I hope it happens for you. I hope all of those things happen.
Thank you so much.
Kristy, thank you so much for presenting for us today. I know that you've got a little bit of a way to go before you defend your dissertation next year, but perhaps there may be an opportunity for you to come back and to share when you've done so. We'd love to hear the outcome of your findings and your where to next as well. It would be absolutely wonderful.
I would absolutely love to. Thank you so much for having me here today. This was a really wonderful experience, and I appreciate you all for being here, for having me.
Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for participating today, and go well, stay safe, and we hope to see you next time.